So now we're in panel 4, and we're going to be talking about wheat. And to lead this conversation entitled Leveraging Innovation and Technology to Transform African Food Systems, Sharing Success Stories, Challenges and Opportunities, let's go to Johannesburg to meet Bronwyn Nielsen, who has a wonderful lineup of guests to tell us all that we need to know about the important scientific and technological progress we've seen for this cereal. Bronwyn, I leave the floor to you.
Thank you very much for joining us for this session where we're going to be sharing success stories, opportunities, and challenges when it comes to leveraging technology and innovation to transform Africa's food systems. I'm joined by Professor Abdulmoneim Taha Ahmed. He's Director General, Agricultural Research Corporation, and Zubair Ibrahim Mohammed, who is Managing Director of Nile Sun Seed Co. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. Professor Taha, I'm going to bring you in first in terms of the case study that you would like to share with us as we delve deep into success stories, opportunities, and challenges.
Thank you. The technology or the technology which made this success story of wheat in Sudan is heat stress tolerant varieties. You see, Sudan is a hot environment, and the environment is considered. It was recognized by ICARDA and Sudan that heat stress as a heat stress platform, which could serve, for example, Sudan and serve the other international or global community by producing these heat stress tolerant varieties. A lot of sessions and lines has been, thousands of them have been under study, and from that, so many varieties went out, have been released in Sudan and even in other African countries. In Sudan, 12 varieties have been released. In Ethiopia, 4 varieties. In Nigeria, 4 varieties. In Niger, 3 varieties. In Mali, 3 varieties. And in Eritrea, 6 varieties. As far as in Sudan, these heat stress tolerant varieties, they have been very successful. At least they brought Sudan actually into production of wheat. Sudan was considered outside the belt of wheat production, but starting from the 70s and the 80s, now Sudan is producing, as far as productivity, is very comparable, for example, to other countries. The varieties was very successful. There was a steady increase in productivity and a steady increase in the self-sufficiency, because Sudan is still importing wheat from outside to fill the gap between the increasing demand and the national production. It has been successful in Sudan, and even in other countries. All those varieties which went to African countries are now in the hands and the fields of small farmers in those African countries.
Zubair, as a high-profile seed company in Sudan, can you add your voice to the discussion at this juncture when it comes to the heat stress tolerant wheat that we are discussing at the moment?
Yeah, it is definitely an achievement. It is really a success story, I believe. ARC has been achieving. Sudan was not known as a company for wheat, as a country for wheat. Not only Sudan, other countries, and Sudan is expanding now in areas which is being known as not wheat areas. And it is a success story in the sense that, yes, Sudan has not developed only the varieties, but has managed also to avail the seed, where we used to import the seed, but now we are producing enough seed for Sudan and for other countries also as well. I think this is a true.
So, Professor Taha, let's pick up there on the challenges that have been apparent to this point, because we are transforming, as correctly highlighted by Zubair there, the Sudan into a wheat producer, given this varietal. But there must have been challenges getting to this point.
Yes, of course, there are challenges actually. Although in Sudan, we are to some extent successfully using what they call the innovation platforms. The innovation platforms are those forums or platforms which bring all the stakeholders along the wheat value chain together, starting from input producers like Zubair's company and other, or credit institutions, farmers groups as producers, and then marketers, and then millers, up to maybe processing and consumption. Although we are using this, but still the strength of the partnership and engagement and interaction of those partners still needs to be strengthened a lot, because it looks like it's kind of a transitional. And what we need actually is a kind of very strategic kind of partnerships, which has built or driven by a very strong and very clear, very focused national self-sufficiency strategy that can drive the partnerships and the conduct and the operation of those partners. The other challenge is really the technical capacity, whether for the research or whether for the seed production. For example, in ARC, the agricultural production, especially for a crop like wheat, which is new to this environment, is very complex actually, with very changing context, with respect to increasing demand, increasing the different quality, the future demand, the nutritional demand, the agro-industry, the quality traits. All these are really very complex. When you put it, for example, in a very changing climate or environment, it is becoming very complex, so that ARC should really work and try to produce or to develop those countries. For this, the technical capacity, for example, in terms of biotechnology, in terms of speedy breeding, in terms of technical capacity of personnel, in terms of modeling, in order to simulate that complex kind of context or environment, so that people would be successful to challenge the changing situation or the changing context, and trying to produce some relevant or some appropriate or relevant heat stress varieties, which could really be successful in Sudan or in other African countries.
Zubair, I want to bring you in here on this technical capacity issue, which is, as highlighted by Professor Taha, a major constraint. How would you see us overcoming the technical capacity constraints that we are experiencing? One, from an actual technical perspective, and secondly, I think Professor Taha also spoke about the expertise, the human capital required from a technical skills perspective.
Yeah, I think the technical capacity is very important here. All through the value chain, starting from the research itself. In the research, we need a technical capacity to be able to use the modern breeding techniques. That's a capacity, I think, professional that required at the level of the research. We need to capacitate our breeders, our scientists, for the new modern technologies, for the science and for the breeding. And at the level also upscaling in seed technology, also we need a capacity for seed technologies. Definitely, that is required, no doubt. I think in this industry in Sudan, we are suffering. We don't have the right human capacity now for seed technology at the level of the production, at the level of everything at the same time. So also with the value chain capacity, technical capacity is required. It's an issue of training. I think we have good people here. we need to capacitate. I think it is a challenge, but it's a challenge that if properly addressed, it can be maintained.
Well, let's pick it up there, Zubair, and bring it back to Professor Taha. As you say, it's a challenge, but it is something that you can overcome through the right partnerships. And perhaps, Professor Taha, you want to pick it up here in terms of the solution, because as much as it is a challenge in terms of technical capacity, it certainly appears to be a huge opportunity if we got the right partnerships together.
Yeah, but I think you're right, but we don't completely lack that capacity. But I think we need to improve it. As far as biotechnology, we started. We have a reasonable level actually of biotechnology, which is being used in breeding, in for example, modeling and considering, for example, those climate change factors. We are having a project now started now supported by the Japanese, which is really added a lot to our wheat research. We are there actually, but we still the challenge is bigger actually, and we need, for example, to improve that capacity in order for to enable ARC to deliver to the expectation. The other thing is that capacity is not just for research and for maybe seed companies. Farmers also actually they need really capacity. You see, most of the farmers who produce wheat are small farmers, and we need to improve their access to the use of smart and precise technologies such as planters, laser levelers, harvesters. Those things are now they are there, but the access of a small farmer to me is it's very common actually, and so that's why we need those kind of partnerships, and we need, for example, maybe investors and to provide us with some kind of intermediate technologies, for example, for those small farmers, in order to get the benefit of these kind of modern precise technologies. In order for them to improve their productivity. Along the whole chain, as my colleague Zubair said, I think we need to improve the capacity. Sometimes it's human, it might be technical, and it might be financial. I think this is one of the things we would like, for example, the African Development Bank and other donors, and even our national governments, to really try to take care of, in order for us to continue and to consolidate and to sustain these successes which you have been delivering over the few years back.
Zubair, interesting to get your voice here as a private sector player in terms of how you think partnerships should come together to solve the challenges.
I think partnership is very important in terms of the involvement of the government itself to set out the policies and the plans, and so everybody can make the plan accordingly. And the government role also to avail the extension service role has to be done. And we have been in partnership with ARC, and we have done some success stories also other than the wheat. In sunflower also we have done some success stories. In sorghum also, ARC has very good success stories in terms of leveraging the average yield of sorghum as well. So the partnership will be at all times between the government, the ARC, and the private sector, as you say. For
Professor Taha, let's
seed increase is another story.
Professor Taha, let's drill down into how it is climate smart. If we look at this heat stress tolerant wheat, can you elaborate?
Yes, it's climate smart. You see, in those heat stress tolerant varieties, we have, for example, they have different maturity time, for example, length, for example. We have short maturing and we have long maturing. So we give the farmers or the producers, for example, the alternative, for example, you see, and our winter is very short, and sometimes even planting time, you cannot control it. The weather actually will control that. So that's why we're giving people alternative kind of varieties, so that if they grow early, this kind of the variety which will be relevant. If you're going to grow late, then you have to move to another variety. In some other, for example, in the eastern part of Sudan, we have this sada شنو اسمه؟ this is
Rust.
Rust. Also, we have some varieties which are really tolerant to rust, so that we use it that. So it is smart in this kind of way. The other thing is that I think it's smart also, not only the variety itself, but even the production practices, or the management practices, which are going to under which, for example, those varieties are going to operate. For example, if you use and most of the wheat, for example, almost all of it is produced under irrigation, and surface irrigation. It's a very problematic actually, as far as wasting of water and inefficiency in water use. We do have some practices, for example, like laser land leveling actually. It has a very good effect, for example, in trying to make our irrigation system, irrigation management very efficient and very professional. This is also one kind of a smart or precision kind of technology, which small farmers cannot really, because it's not readily available for everybody, and even the cost of it is very high.
I want to, and you bring up a very important point, because I want to understand the cost of the heat stress tolerant seeds versus normal seeds. And I think Zubair will come in here and add his voice. But just before we go to Zubair, Professor Taha, you mentioned cost restrictions. Can you take that a little further?
Well, as far as the variety itself, we consider all the wheat varieties in Sudan are heat stress actually tolerant. Yeah, because with very minor changes. For example, you see in the north, maybe because the weather or the winter is somewhat longer and colder, but we consider all of them actually are heat tolerant. That's why other countries are using.
What are the cost points? Is it very expensive? Zubair,
not the seeds itself. Not the seeds itself. Well, yeah, if you want to go to certified seeds, yeah, it's expensive. But there are some kind of other seeds, like good seeds or clean seeds, or even farmer seeds. Those, yeah, the cost of that one, Zubair might talk better than. But the seed cost is considered to other, like chemical fertilizers or irrigation. The seed cost actually is kind of reasonable. Actually, it's not very high. But Zubair can continue on this.
Zubair?
Yeah, the issue of the certified seed, most important part of it is that we as seed companies or seed technologists, we are supposed to maintain the quality that is mainly developed for heat tolerance. And that maybe will bring in that it will be more measures is required to maintain the quality, genetical quality. At the same time, you want to maintain also the purity of the seed and the high level of germination. So all these levels on how do you have this field? You have to monitor the seed in the store. You have to treat it. You have to clean it. You have to treat it. You have to pack it properly with all the seed treatments against diseases, against soil pest. So yeah, I agree. It will come up with a cost, but at the end, it is definitely rewarding for the farmer. It is rewarding for the farmer to be able to produce high yield, because the farmer at the end is concerned.
Professor Taha.
They maintain that it is good yield and good quality. So, but I agree, it could be the cost is an issue that need to be considered with the farmers. I think if the farmers are are supported to get the seed. Again, his finances is going to be no problem. Because if he got a good seed at the end of the season, he will get a good deal and he will be able to settle his finance. I think it is a challenge, but there is a solution. If you avail a finance for the farmer, the farmer, they get the seed against credit and they settle their credit, no problem at all, because the variety is a good yielder despite the climate.
Professor Taha, I want to touch briefly, we've got 5 minutes left of the discussion before we go to our part 2 in the series of successes, challenges and opportunities. But perhaps you can talk to me about the robust extension systems that are needed to really help farmers benefit from the technologies. Because again, you've both referenced repeatedly the small-scale farmers, and I would even go further to say small-scale farmers that are really subsistence farmers. Professor Taha?
Yeah, you see, they do need really strong extension system and advisory services, but the capacity, and this is done by the public extension department or the public extension system, and it is really poorly capacitated in terms of technical capacity with respect to modern and relevant extension method and the capacity to reach out for farmers in rural areas. It's really a problem for our extension. I think as far as the staff and the human resources, I think they are very well resourced, the public extension system, but its capacity to move, its capacity to reach out for farmers, its capacity to use modern and very relevant modern extension means and methods is very poor actually, because of that. It's public and it's not really well capacitated by the government. Now in our strategy actually we're trying to let all those stakeholders along the value chain are to provide, for example, advisory services. For example, if the farmer, for example, come to Zubair to buy some certified seeds, I think they will provide them with some kind of advisories and extension services, so that how to use this and what to expect out of this from. Also, for example, from we have the Agricultural Bank of Sudan, which is the main credit institution which supports small farmers, and also they support small farmers, but they don't give, of course, cash, but they give, for example, those technical packages, whether it's seeds, fertilizers, pesticides, and sacks, and maybe provide them with them or with some cash for machinery for land preparation or maybe for harvest. But those also we encourage them, for example, to provide some advisory services. So we want kind of the whole platform to provide some advisory services. But the problem with this innovation platform is that there is no champion. I think it needs a champion, for example, to organize and to lead people, which is not still there actually.
Well, there we go. There's a big solution that we can drive further in the discussion that follows. That is about a champion for the sector as a whole. And Zubair, I just want to conclude on a final question, and that is whether you are starting to see a new generation of farmers coming to the fore, given the new technologies that we're seeing developed.
Marlene, what that question to me? Was it to me, that question?
Yes, Zubair, it was to you. We seem to have, I just want to pick that up again. Have I got you? Yes, let me pick that up again with you, Zubair. So Zubair, given the technology.
What was the question?
I'll repeat it now. Professor Taha, they're saying that a champion is
What was the question?
Professor Taha saying there that a champion is needed to really drive the change and the innovation at speed that is needed in the sector. Zubair, I want to close on a final point to you, and that is whether we are seeing a new generation of farmers coming to the fore, given the new technologies and innovations that we are seeing. To you, Zubair. Are we seeing a new generation of farmers coming into the fold, given the
new generation of farmers, you mean?
Are we seeing a new generation of farmers coming into the fold, given innovation and the development of new technologies? Do you think we're seeing a new generation of farmers?
Yeah, I think we are seeing new generation of farmers coming in. That is natural, of course, and we see them picking the technologies better than we knew before. I think this is very clear. We can build on it actually in our extension plans or extension strategies. I think there is new generation of farmers coming in who understand and who are ready to pick up and adopt the technologies.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for that discussion. I've been chatting to Zubair Ibrahim Mohammed, Managing Director of Now Sun Seed Co. And I've also been talking to Professor Abdulmen Taha Ahmed, who's Director General at the Agricultural Research Corporation, ARC. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was a great video. What a great backdrop to the second part of our discussion on wheat and how technology can boost Africa's productivity. Wheat is indeed increasingly in demand, but the continent as a whole remains dependent on imports as it still struggles to produce enough of the cereal. Still, progress is being made as experts find innovative solutions. So what works, what doesn't, what are the success stories? Let's go back to you, Bronwyn, to find out.
We're still talking about success stories, opportunities, and challenges when it comes to leveraging technology and innovation to transform Africa's food systems. And I'm joined now by Mr. Ali Abu Saba, who is the Director General at ICADA, the International Center for Agricultural Research in Dry Areas, and also by Dr. Fito Isima Bariso, who is Director General of the Ethiopian Institute of Agricultural Research. And thank you very much, gentlemen. Well, let's continue in terms of unpacking success stories. And Mr. Abu Saba, I'm going to bring you into the conversation at this juncture. If you can kick us off on the case study that you would like to bring into light.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to share some of the experiences that we are going through. I think, as part of the Feed Africa flagship work that the African Development Bank is doing, a number of centers from within the CGIAR are working on different compacts that are seeking to advance the agricultural production across the continent. Wheat, of course, is a key commodity that is consumed at large quantities on the continent, and also one where 75% of the continent's needs in sub-Saharan Africa are met through importation. So the bank has taken actually leadership in trying to advance this and leveraging science and technology based on many years of research from within the CG to try and promote and advance and increase Africa's capacity on wheat production. Our predecessors just spoke about their experiences in Sudan, and I would probably just expand that a little bit. Still under the TAT, that's the Technologies for African Agricultural Transformation, funded by the African Development Bank. There, basically, the approach for innovation that we use is to bring in a package of a number of technologies together. The agriculture, as it may seem simple, it's still very complex in the way it's conducted, planned, and I think the approach that the African Development Bank is pushing for is to run agriculture as a business. From the research perspective on our side, we bring in the right varieties that would suit different environments in Africa. Heat is, of course, a key element. So heat and drought tolerant, as well as disease resistant varieties are key to this wheat production across the continent. But this needs to be combined with the appropriate agronomic management practices. When do you plant, how you plant, when do you fertilize, serving the crops in terms of weed production, pest control. And then the third element is the irrigation element. We've developed together with a number of our NARS partners a technology called Mechanized raised bed machine, which is a very simple technology adapted to African local conditions that helps reduce water use by about 20%. It reduces the seed amount of seed you need to apply almost by 50%. It increases the farmer's overall return by amounts up to 30% in certain locations. So the overall efficiency gains and return on crop per drop also of water is magnified. And now this cannot function without a proper and functioning seed systems that is able to fast track testing and release of improved varieties, because the varieties will continue to evolve. And I think the seed sector here becomes one very important area where Africa is lagging. And I'm sure we can discuss that at a later stage. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Dr. Bariso, if I can bring you in, and obviously if you can weigh in with the Ethiopian scenario, given your research.
Thank you very much for having me. Let me start with the background of wheat production in Ethiopia. Wheat is a strategic crop in Ethiopia because of its role in food security as import substitute and supply for raw materials. When I say it is important for food security, it is one of the staple crops in our country, and it is highly consumed. One person consumes about 0.07 ton per year. That means we have about 110 million population, and we consume about 70 million ton per year. We cultivate this wheat in 1.8 million hectare of land with average productivity about 2.8, which equals to 50 million tons per year. That means the consumption is about 70 million, the production is about 50 million. That means we have a deficit of 20 million ton per year, and we spend about $1 billion each year. To just revert this problem, we were relying on two major issues. The first one is just to intensify the productivity in areas where we were producing wheat under rain-fed. That can be with 3 or 4 options. That means by increasing inputs like fertilizer and seed. The second option is by reclaiming the acidic soil, which is about 40% of our cropland. And also there is a possibility by draining these vertisols. Other option is just using the irrigated wheats in lowlands. We do have huge amount of area and perennial rivers which are flowing, and these lands are uncultivated. Some 10 years back, we started to produce wheat, and we had a good experience in there. In Ethiopia, many efforts were made, collaboration with national research programs and international research partnership like CIMIT and ICARDA. We have successfully released about 100 bread wheat varieties and more than 40 drum wheat varieties since 1960s, but with a little attention toward this irrigated wheats, because we were feeding our population in highlands where we have ample amount of rainfall, but now the population is increasing and the climate change is also there, and we couldn't feed our population. But recently, with funding from African Development Bank, implemented the support of agricultural research for development on strategic commodities, and that with compact project, we have already released about 6 high-yielding varieties that can give about 6 to 7 tons per hectare. And this done in collaboration with ICARDA and the AIR, and we would like to thank ICARDA on this behalf. These are the efforts that we are making so far.
Mr. Abu Saba, let me bring you back in here in terms of the climate smart element, and I pick up on that more crop per drop that you alluded to. Of course, Dr. Bariso there alluding to the issues around rainfall, specifically across the continent. I think that most geographies experience this, but this is transformative, and surely this can lead to getting relatively excited about the potential to widely transform the agricultural landscape when it comes to wheat production. Am I getting ahead of myself? I mean, could we start looking at where we drop this importing of wheat, and how far out is that across the continent?
It is definitely possible. And I think that's the vision that the African Development Bank is advancing. And I think we are basically trying to deploy the science to help Africa progress in that direction. So how is this, and how can this happen? And of course, how is this also climate smart in the same time, in the interest of time? You know, Africa is not traditionally a continent where wheat is grown. And I think that is largely due to high temperatures and the different nature of the growing seasons. And I think the climate smart element comes from the fact that you are able to draw on a very rich and diverse genetic material that we have in the gene banks of ICARDA and also in other CIMMYT within the CGIAR to identify the right level of varieties that can, for example, be fast maturing. It could be resistant to those kind of changing growing situations, because it's not just about the heat, it's about the changing of our climate across the season, the change in the growing season itself, advancing or becoming delayed. Associated with the whole question of water, you know, in some water is going to be really the most a critical commodity in the future. So
well, they say, I mean, Mr. Busaba, to just say it, they say the next wars will be fought over water. That always puts the water shortages that we're going to face into perspective for me.
Well, I would you know, agree about the importance of this, not necessarily through wars, but I think about more conscious ways of consuming that critical resource for all human beings on the planet. So, you know, I know, for instance, that the question of not just producing wheat, I think it's producing wheat responsibly. It's producing wheat in a manner that also addresses some of the critical needs of the people on the planet in terms of the diversity of the food that they eat, so that you have a more diverse production system. It's good for the land, it's good for the soil, but it's also good for the human beings who are eating this diverse you know, diets, because then the whole question of health, and we're seeing COVID, for example, where the immunity becomes critical and central on how you know, people, including on the African continent, are expected and will be empowered and able to deal with those kind of challenges. So in short, the climate smart element comes from the selection of the variety. And of course, with the changing climate, you have different types of disease and insects that will come. So how do you anticipate and stay ahead of the curve by being able to draw those kind of varieties that will enable the African farmers to grow wheat and still make a profit and not lose it to pest and disease, including, of course, the challenges during the post-harvest process itself.
Exactly, and I think you bring up a very, very important point there, is that we are looking to disease-resistant varietals. It is not just about the heat stress tolerant wheat varietals. Dr. Bariso, let's bring you back in at this juncture. And I do want to also touch on getting these varietals to the small scale farmers as we initially started in the first part of our discussion, because as we know, and I'm coming back to the subsistence nature of farming across the African continent, that is the reality.
Yeah, one of the major problem in our country is also the early generation seed production, which can be handled by different sectors in our country. You know, the research center generate this breeder seed, and then it will hand over to another organization that is a seed producer, and it can be multiplied there. And the distributor is also another organization. In between, there is an extension service which can carry all these products to the end users. In most cases, you can see that in Ethiopia, the seed coverage is about 20%, even in the rain-fed system, let alone this newly started irrigated wheat. So the main challenge is just to have enough amount of seed that can just satisfy the need of our end users. That is the main challenge. From the research side, the capacity is limited. Again, the producers are also not interested to produce these wheats. And also there is a problem in the extension service. Provided these all challenges, the government is taking step forward to unlock this kind of problem. The government take a new initiative to embark on this activity, because the only solution that can bring change in our country is just to extensively use this land, which were bare throughout the year, and maybe sometimes can be used for grazing animals when the rain comes. Otherwise, it's bare. But the rivers are flowing by side of this river, which we didn't use. Of course, the government is stepping in just to solve this problem.
Mr. Abu Saba, let's chat there about the role of extension services as highlighted by Dr. Bariso.
The extension system of the entire continent is not in a very good shape, I'm sorry to say. I think if the continent needs to leap into the future, there is urgent need to invest into strengthening the existing extension system. And I think there are enormous opportunities that exist there, given the advancement in technology, ICT, remote sensing. In ICARDA, we've developed applications and programs that is able to perform a variety of functions to help us understand where the crops are, in which geography, in which location, if they are facing any challenges in terms of pest and disease. How do you manage the process? How do you monitor the yield? How do you improve the provision of fertilizer? And how do you able to look at the performance of these crops in the field and compare them to what the optimal performance can be, and then use that as a management tool to influence. And I think that by itself offers enormous opportunities for employment for the youth. Again, a very important challenge and requirement, on the African continent. Now, a very essential element for a functional extension system is the whole question of policy. And I think, again, having the right policies in place will definitely enable the functioning of extension system. And in Africa, we are facing, legacy issues around subsidy, around monopoly, around even governance. I mean, a major challenge, I'm sure my brother Fetu will agree with me. Many of the African farmers today use seeds that have varieties that were developed 20 years ago. We have technologies on the shelves that is not yet in farmer fields. It's 20 years in advance. But the whole question about how this
the resources to access those seeds.
Well, you have that. Resources is definitely one element, but you also have to have the institutions and the policies to make sure that you get the right seeds, multiply them, and then make them available to the farmers. And you bridge 15 years of production and jump and being able to address this whole yield gap. So engaging in a very strong way in the private sector is key. I think one of the weakest areas in Africa is seed systems, and I think there is an enormous amount of work currently going under what we call the One CGIAR, which brings all the CG centers together in trying to promote further a more stronger and much more integrated package of technology to the African farmers with the view to advance not just wheat production, but a variety of crops that are essential to the well-being of people.
Dr. Bariso, you were nodding furiously there when Mr. Abusaba was talking about policy, about regulation, and this is where I see the low-hanging fruit. I mean, policy, legislation, enabling environments, this cannot be far off. We know what policies are needed, so why are we still discussing this?
Yeah, let me just talk about the extension system in Ethiopia. The current extension system of Ethiopia has a great potential to help farmers in the country because the number of development agents that we have is too huge. We have about 21 development agents per 10,000 farmers. That means it's a huge number, and even it's ranked first in the world. It uses the FTC-based extension approach where the group of farmers goes to the farmers training center and take the lesson there and tries to implement in their farms. But that system is not producing the result that was aspired. That is because of many reasons. The evidence for this is that the technologies are not reaching the whole farming community. And just if we go for inventory, we can see that the technologies, as mentioned earlier, maybe 20 years old technologies are still in the business, while we have a recent technology which are much far productive than the previous one. And even a new technology, and then if they take that technology to the farmers, it's not performing as they are performing at the research center. Maybe this implies that the technologies are not really conveyed to the farmers. This is mainly attributed to many factors, which I'm not going to mention, but there are a lack in staff benefit, incentive, budget, inadequate infrastructure, and facilities, many to mention. Now the government, by looking into this, they are just trying to revise the already existing policy in place by having many things in mind, just by changing the way the extension agents thinking. And then the Ministry of Agriculture is taking a step forward to revise all this problem on the ground. And this is the most important bottleneck in the agricultural system in Ethiopia.
Well, it's good that we've got to the most important bottleneck in the agricultural system there in Ethiopia. I'm going to get a closing comment here from both of you. We have only got 1 minute left of this segment of our discussion. And Mr. Abusaba, give me your closing comment here as we talk to the key point you'd like to leave our audience with.
Well, I think we have enough capacity and outcomes of the long-standing research under the CGIAR that is capable of unlocking the potential of African agriculture. And I think the work that the African Development Bank, and I know my brother Noor Abdi later on from the Islamic Development Bank, I think development institutions need to come together and unlock that potential by taking the science from where it is to the farmer fields. Thank you.
Dr. Bariso, just a final comment from your side.
Yeah, now the government in Ethiopia is taking a step forward, and they are just focusing on the feeding our population by looking into both options that I have mentioned, intensified agriculture as well as the extensive ones through irrigation system. So it's really important to carry the technologies that we have on hand to the farmers' field and unlock the existing problem, and the policy change is also really appreciable, and the government should have to embark on this activity, and they should not have to be stepped back again to the previous system. And if it takes a step forward, I think we can feed our population even from the irrigated wheat we have. If we produce about 400,000 hectares with average productivity of 4.4 or about 5 ton per hectare per year, we can definitely feed our population, and we can stop wheat importing, and we become wheat exporters in the near future.
Well, of course, that is the vision, that ultimately Africa becomes its own breadbasket, and we do stop importing any of the wheat that we need for consumption on the continent. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Obusaba and Dr. Bariso.
Thank you very much, Bronwyn, and our esteemed guests. Thank you especially for mentioning, among other very interesting facts, that wheat is not a cereal that is traditionally grown in Africa, and thus the need to find the right kind of seeds and technology to make it work for the continent and its population. Now, without further ado, it's back to you, Bronwyn, for the last part of our discussion on wheat today.
We're into our final segment here on success stories, opportunities, and challenges when it comes to leveraging technology and innovation to transform Africa's food systems. And it's my pleasure to introduce you to Noor Abdi. He is head of the Agriculture Global Practice Islamic Development Bank Group. Thank you very much, Noor, for your time. And I suppose we've got to kick off. We've got lots of elements to touch on, given the discussions that have led to our engagement here. But really, let's talk about the role of an international development bank when it comes to helping leverage that technology and innovation to transform Africa's food systems.
Hello, Bronwyn. Thank you for having me on the panel. Good afternoon to my colleagues who are also on the panel. Yeah, there are a number of ways that MDBs, such as the Islamic Development Bank, can leverage innovation and technology for the transformation of the food systems in the continent. But let me just highlight a couple of them, probably one or two that are relevant for the theme of our discussion. The first one, I think, is the most important one, which is financing. As financial institution, I think investments that we make to assist countries in the region and their national research and development institutions to scale up proven technologies and innovations is very critical. Scaling up technologies to reach millions of farmers, and we heard from the previous sessions this afternoon, requires substantial amount of investments, often associated with infrastructure development, including irrigation, rural roads, processing, and so on and so forth. So I think this is very critical in achieving impact on the livelihoods of smallholder farmers in particular, but also the agri-food system in the continent in general.
How do you measure the impact of that investment when you do deploy monetary aid where it comes to Africa's food systems? How do you monitor the effectiveness of that aid deployment?
Well, one of those indicators that we use in the institution is the uptake of these technologies. And there are a number of ways of in fact doing that. The often issue that is talked about in development finance is how can you really make an impact at the smallholder farmers level. And I think some of the colleagues during the intervention spoke about that earlier today. We use a number of tools in facilitating that technology transfer to from the research to the smallholder farmers. One of the things I think that was also mentioned during the discussion this afternoon is these innovation platforms. For instance, innovation hubs that enable engagement of the NARS and the private sector together with civil society for scaling up solutions that contribute to not only increasing the income of smallholder farmers, but also the commercialization of those smallholder farmers is very critical. And we do see that really growing from our programs and projects that we invest that support innovation hubs. As technology incubators, they play an important role, really, not only in technology transfer, but also use and dissemination of innovations. So really, it is one of those unique roles that we play as a financial institution at the global level, have that leverage to support regional initiatives that bring number of technologies at the regional level, capitalize on this economy of scale, facilitate technology transfer across borders. Especially when you look at these regional innovations at the regional level, those innovational hubs, they allow, in fact, national governments and development partners, including MDBs, pool resources. So they're also another way of being cost effective in achieving greater impact at the regional level. So, and there are a couple of very successful models really in the continent, whether you're talking about livestock or rice value chain that we invest in the African context.
Earlier on in our discussion, Zubair from now Seed Sun, also now Sun Seeds, alluded to the fact that a champion was needed to drive effective cohesion in this space. What is your sense? Because often we have many different partners and MDBs, development institutions firing in different arenas. Do you think we've seen enough consolidation, enough championing of this arena?
Yes and no, to be frank. Yes, because you do really have, Africa has a couple of CG centers. And one that I can point to is ILRI, that's based in Kenya, Nairobi. Also, ICAD is present in the continent. But also you have in West Africa, Africa Rice, which is based in Abidjan, Cote d'Ivoire. So I think the role of these CG centers, providing that platform to become some sort of champions to facilitate that regional integration in terms of technology transfer is very critical. But you also do have the RECs in the region. I mean, you have the ECOWAS, for example, in West Africa. You have the ECA in East Africa, and IGAD also that's based in Djibouti. So they could play a significant role as well. Look, I mean, the key here, I think, is efficiency, to drive efficiency at the regional level, at the scale. So these technologies are very expensive to produce, and they take a long time. And Ali spoke about the lag time involved in getting technology from the shelf to the farmers. Once you have those technologies ready for replication, you really need to go at a scale. And the only way you can go that is the partnership between financiers like the African Development Bank, Islamic Development Bank, and the World Bank, but also the research community, the CG centers that can really facilitate that transaction process by championing, for example, the innovation hubs that you spoke to.
No, on the 1st of January 2021, the African Continental Free Trade Area went live. Now, surely this has got to help with the momentum of transforming the continent as a whole when it comes to leveraging innovation and technology to transform the food security across the continent.
Yeah, certainly. But you see, you also need really to invest significantly in infrastructure. You cannot promote trade without having a very poor infrastructure, not at the continental level, but also at the regional level. If you really need to provide this regional integration, and I think African Development Bank and the Islamic Development Bank are on a spot in that regard, because we invest in a lot of infrastructure financing, whether it is connecting the corridors between the regions, highways, railways, airports, but also infrastructure in terms of human capacity. Look, I think to transform agri-food system in the continent, we need really to strengthen the national research systems beyond the infrastructure financing, right? Which is under-resourced. So we spoke about that today. A lot of my colleagues prior to my intervention talked about the fact that Africa is really, really suffering and lagging behind in terms of capacity. When you look at the numbers, it's very striking, Brian. You see, we do have in the continent 35 researchers for every 1 million inhabitants. So when you look in Europe, for example, you're talking about 2,500, and the United States is 4,000 scientists or researchers per every 1 million inhabitants. So really, I mean, the dichotomy is very clear. Now, we also need to know, to encourage rather, the governments in the continent really need to invest in agriculture. Now,
So
when you look at
what is your level of commitment, Nur, as the Islamic Development Bank to this research when it comes to the African continent and agriculture?
Well, as a multilateral development financial institution, as you may know, Berwin, we do invest in through projects, basically. So we do have a pipeline of every 3 years that we put in place. We engage with the countries and work out a plan to invest in our member countries based on a 3-year rolling plan. But let me give you some sort of indicative figures, what we have done over the past 10 years. The bank, Islamic Development Bank, invested almost $1 billion on annual basis in agriculture over the past decade. Now, because we do have a new policy in place and we want to focus more on developing global, value chains, integrating those smallholder farms into continent, global value chains, we really need to now re-engineer our business model, which we have done really, to make sure that we work with the government so they can actually put in place systems that will enable not only the bank, but also private sector to invest in. Before you ask your question, I was saying that the government invests less than 1% of their GDPs in agriculture, right? There is definitely a need to think of alternative development financing models, Berwin, if we really need to move the needle. Now, where you have the private sector.
We desperately need to move the needle. I think we all concur on that.
Certainly, where you really need to provide a space for the private sector to come in. But the key here is we know that this to really work primarily is, depends on the ability of these governments, national governments in the continent, really to put in place policies and implement them, that will direct private sector investments towards agri-food systems. And I think MDBs.
No, just to elaborate there, governments need to create an enabling environment from a policy perspective to encourage private sector investment.
That is correct, yes. And MDBs can definitely help in that regard, yes.
So let's, we've got 4 minutes left on this section. There's so many elements that we have discussed, and I think it's critical that we look to a conclusion which really says there are challenges, but in those challenges are opportunities. So if I was to get you to summarize what has been a very informative session and perhaps leave our audience with some high-level thoughts that they can take and implement directly post this session in the coming days, months, years to get to that vision which we spoke about earlier. We don't want to import food for the continent. We want to produce it here and get to the stage where ultimately we are exporting food and becoming the potential for the breadbasket of the world.
Right. Thank you, Berwin. Yes. You see, and I invite, before I address or talk to that point, let me invite my colleagues who are on the panel and everybody who's listening that we recently released our, our first agriculture and food industry report that is one of a series of industry features reports that we release in the institution, and this one is on food systems. So I invite everyone who is interested to download a copy from our website, which is isdb.org. Now, this report argues in Africa, we can really build resilient agricultural global value chains. And that is important because value chains will not only increase or drive the technology that Ali and the colleagues before me spoke about in terms of linkages with the smallholder farmers, but they really create an environment where you have seamless supply chains where farmers benefit, traders benefit, but also consumers benefit in terms of cost and availability of food. And I think that science and technology and innovations are important components of the agricultural solutions toolbox to building resilient agri-food systems in the continent. So partnerships is very critical, whether you talk about the research systems and the development financial institutions like MDBs to work together in delivering those promises. But I think moving forward, the bank as a financial institution really considers science, technology, innovation as a key component to the development of the continent and our member countries. For the first time last year, our board approved our first science and technology innovation policy, and we put in place science and technology and innovation fund that is a total of $500 million US. And I invite your participants actually to get more information on our website.
No, Abdi, thank you so much for that stimulating conversation. We're all moving in the right direction, and clearly policy needs to be dealt with speed and with collaboration, multiple partners coming to the fore to utilize or leverage the current innovation and technology, as we have heard has been showcased on this platform repeatedly. The technology exists, the innovation exists. Now let's make sure that that is widespread and deployed across the African continent to transform Africa's system. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bonwin. Now we know everything there is to know about wheat.